Shalom, everyone, and today we're discussing the idea of Purim according to Kabbalah. However, this Purim, we are also in the middle of a war against the greatest Amalek of our generation, against the Khamenei that was killed yesterday, finally, and his regime that were like the Amalek in ancient times, targeted just to kill Jews for the sake of it, as a religious and metaphysical goal. And that's exactly the definition of Amalek. Although we are in the year 2026, still there are ideologies that are pathologically bad. It's a disease, it's an obsession, illogical, and still being tolerated in the UN and all over the world, like, you know, like we're not in the age of reason. And why is it that people that are for freedom and academic freedom and so on, they are very tolerant towards those Amalekites, which means people who hate without any real reason, uh, and in a way that is very destructive. So let us begin to understand the process by understanding the story of Purim. So let us begin. We'll start with the background of Rabbi Nissim Peretz, of blessed memory, a great Kabbalist, my teacher. And I'll read his introduction to what is the meaning of Purim from a spiritual level. So he says, Omrim b'shem Arizal, ki Yom HaKippurim, it is said in the name of Rabbi Zakluria and other Kabbalists, that Yom Kippurim, which is the holiest day in the Hebrew calendar, Kippurim sounds like Ke Purim, as Purim, which means as Purim means that it's not like Purim, it's less than Purim. וצריך להבין, הרי כולנו יודעים, I'll read it in English to save time, and we should understand, because everybody who knows the holiday of Yom Kippur knows how awe-inspiring Yom Kippur could be, like no other day along the year. So how can we understand Rabbi Zakluria saying that Yom Kippurim is not even close to the level of Purim? And we also see the respect, the respect that big part of the Jewish people give to Yom Kippur, with reverence. We're like, well, this is a very important holiday. Well, Purim is not that much. It's more like a holiday for kids among many people. It's like the observance of Purim, the observance of Yom Kippur, you cannot even compare. We should know that when the Arizal is saying that, it's not a joke, God forbid. It is reality, which means Rabbi Zakluria is not talking about religion or tradition. He's speaking about the illumination, about what is happening in the metaphysical dimension on Yom Kippur and on Yom Kippurim. Because he's saying that the illumination, the light that is being revealed on the day of Purim is so high, greater than the light that reveals itself on the holiday of Yom Kippurim. How can we explain that? Because again, we all know that Yom Kippur is very holy, and whoever visited in Israel, you realize that even Israel is not a very religious country, but still Yom Kippur, there are no cars on the streets and on the highways. Everybody's home. So what does it mean? Because respecting the holiday of Yom Kippur, but on Purim, most people go to work, and it's not, and most people do not listen to the reading of the Megillah. And we know that Yom Kippur is like the Shabbat of all holidays. And the finishing prayer, Ne'ilah of Yom Kippur, is the highest point of the year. And that is not even close to the holiness of Purim. What does it mean? So we have to understand that, first of all, the name Purim is coming from the word pur, which means lottery in Hebrew. As it says in the Megillah, that Haman, he made a lottery to find what is the day to kill and exterminate all the Jews in one day in the great Persian Empire. But there's another meaning to the word lottery. We all know that. It's like a hint that a person can work in a really great, in a very good job and make a lot of money, or you can get a special job, temporary job, that is like that you can make much more money. Still, this is nothing like the money you get when you win the lottery. Which means that winning the lottery has nothing to do with effort and talent. Same thing is with the holiday of Purim. In the holiday of Purim, it's like winning the lottery spiritually. There's so much light that is coming from above, and it has nothing to do with how spiritual you have to become, which means achieving the great, awesome power of Yom Kippurim, that needs a preparation of 40 days from the new moon of Elul, Virgo, Rosh Chodesh Elul, till Yom Kippur. There are 40 days of that you really have daily to make the effort to purify the consciousness and the body and the behavior and everything by charity and prayers and study, so you can reach to a high level according to your own deeds and efforts. However, in Purim, there is so much light, greater light that is being revealed, nothing to do with how much you worked for it. Which means there's no period of days before that you really prepare for that you purify yourself, that you cleanse yourself for that. No. And who wins that? That light can give you bliss for the whole year round. How can we explain that? Because that's totally, it's like lottery. Well, Yom Kippur is hard work. So Rabbi Shalom Sharabi, the great Yemenite Kabbalist of the 18th century, that he was still young when he came to Jerusalem and became the greatest Kabbalist of his generation. And he basically expanded all the teachings of the Ari to really like opening the code of the meditations and how the spiritual dimension is structured. So according to the Rashash, we can understand two things about the light of Hanukkah, the miraculous light, of Purim. A, it is very, very powerful. B, it's coming from the highest place all the way down to the lowest place, which means it's the intensity and it's also the latitude. Not like the light that is appearing on Shabbat and holidays, that it's always coming from it's a high level, not as high as the light of Yom Kippur. Here, the light of Yom Kippur is coming from the upper Keter, from the Reisha Delayit Yada, from the level of inconceivable that the brain, the mind cannot perceive. And that light is being revealed through the prayers of Purim and all the mitzvot of Purim. Okay, so how did that happen? We have to understand the historical background. First of all, the destruction of the first temple was some 2,600 years ago, the year 586 BCE, destruction of the first temple. The Babylonians destroyed the first temple, and they took most of the people of the kingdom of Judea, that its capital was in Jerusalem. The Babylonians destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, destroyed the city and the walls of Jerusalem, and took most of the people of the kingdom of Judea to Babylon and its surroundings into captivity. So this is 586 BCE. Few decades later, it's the fall of Babylon. The Babylonian Empire that destroyed the temple, subjugated the Jews, destroyed the kingdom of Judea, and got exiled the Jews out of its own indigenous homeland, was taken over by the Persian Empire. The king of the Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great, he makes the Cyrus Declaration that he announces that the Jews can, A, take the treasures of the temple that the Babylonians robbed, take it back, bring it back to the ancestral homeland, rebuild their ancestral homeland, and to make an autonomous state in that place. So tens of thousands of Jews left and went back to the desolated land of Judea, which is, at that time, it shrunk because all the nations around started to take over the spoils of the land of Judea. So if the land of Judea in the time before the destruction was from the Negev all the way down to the Samaria, it was Judea of today, Judea, Samaria, the coastal plain, and part of the Negev. Now Judea was a very small place. To the south were the Edomites, to the north the Samaritans, and there were the Ammonites and the Moabites on the east, and so on and so forth. Now, as the Jews came back and they re-established their autonomous state that was called Yahud Medinata in Aramaic, or in Hebrew, the state of Judea. Okay, they had a governor, they had their own coins during the Persian Empire. Now, the neighbors did not want the Jews to build a temple because that will draw more Jews and more power to the new state. So they sent money and people to the capital of the empire in Persia in order to lobby till they got the canceling the permit to build the second temple. Okay, now there was no permit to build a second temple. The Jews needed to create another pro-Judean lobby, and there was one of the leaders, the biggest leader, his name was Mordechai. He was among the people who went to build the new state of Judea, but he went back to Persia to create a lobby in order to get back the license to be and the permit to build the second temple. So now the head of the anti-Jewish lobby was Haman. The head of the Jewish lobby was Mordechai. They were big enemies, and that's the background of the Megillah. Now, the miracle of Purim, which basically dethroned Haman from being the strongest person in the government of the Persian Empire, and instead of him, Mordechai and Esther are getting the power to run the government. Of course, the result was it took a while, and they renewed the permit to build the second temple. And around 70 years, and about exactly 70 years, which means in the year 516 BCE, 70 years exactly after the destruction, 586, the second temple was rebuilt. Okay? That was exactly according to the prophecy of the prophet Jeremiah, that when he prophesied about the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, he also promised that 70 years later, the temple will be rebuilt. So basically, the whole story of Purim is kind of echoing the political uh, battle between the two big parties, the pro-Judean, pro-temple party and the anti-temple party that represented many nations and many neighbors. Okay? And by the way, to remind us, something that happened a little bit longer than 100 years ago, we're talking about the falling of the empire, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire falls, and then there is the San Remo Convention. San Remo Convention is the peace treaty with the Ottomans, with the Turkish, now it's the new Turkey. And in the peace treaty, the Ottoman Empire is being divided into mandates. What does it mean, mandates? That the superpowers, France, and especially France and Britain, are dividing the Middle East between them as mandates. What does it mean, a mandate? They don't really take over, but they take over in order for the purpose to establish new independent states. So Mesopotamia was named Iraq, and then there was Syria and Lebanon and Palestine. The British Palestine was written really clearly, the whole area that is from the river to the sea. But there was, again, I don't want to go into the details, it will be a place for rebuilding, reinstating the Jewish homeland. In that treaty, the Ottomans, the previous owner of what was known then in the treaty as Palestine, they gave the British the land in order to reinstate a Jewish homeland. Therefore, all people in the British Mandate area were entitled to their land. However, most of the land that was desolated and was state land was allocated by the law, by international law, signed by the League of Nations to be settled by only for Jewish immigration. It was not allowed to have any other immigration, only Jewish immigration. Every empty land was supposed to be allocated for Jewish settlement. That's the international law, from the river to the sea. What happened was Jews started to come from all over the world to settle in the new land, the British Mandate. The Arabs started to rebel, and then the British basically canceled the permit. And they created 3 stages. They call it the White Paper, in which the last White Paper of 1939 basically withdrew against the international law. And from that moment on, the British said there won't be more Jewish immigrants to the British Mandate. The whole British Mandate will be allocated for an Arab states. And the Jews are supposed to be just a minority. Okay, that was against the original international law. By the way, according to international law, that law was never changed. And in the Article 80 of the United Nations Charter, it is said very clearly that the same rule applies to Palestine, today's Israel, and can never be revoked by anyone. Okay, so here it is. Now we have it very similar. So when And then comes the Nazi Holocaust, and the British do not allow the Jews to come back to their homeland, although they have a mandate for that purpose only. And the Nazis in the beginning, they allowed any Jews who wanted to come to go to the British mandate Palestine. The Nazis allowed them even to take machinery and all kinds of industrial needs to build the industry in the British mandate Palestine. That was happened, but the British were against it. Okay, the British were against it, against international law. Now, if you can see the similarities, but there's another similarity. So now let's see how it is. And now we go into the writings of the Ari, Rabbi Zakloria, Shara Kavanot, the Gate of Meditations, the matter of Purim, the first dush, the first chapter. ועתה נבוא על ביאור עניין ימי הפורים. Now we'll explain the days of Purim והמגילה and the book of Esther on the parchment, that's how you read it. והמרדכי, here something very weird, he calls Mordechai, the man of the day of Purim. They call him Ha-Mordechai, the Mordechai, as a noun, not as a name of a person, but as a noun. Why? We'll see. And Ma'ot Mikbat Purim, and also the charity, the money, the half a shekel of Purim, Ve'amishte, and the feast, Ve'asimcha, and the celebration, it's all part of the mitzvot of Purim. What's the issue over here? הנה נדבר אצלנו בדרושי נוקבה דזנפין, ועניין מיעוט הירח. There's a very, very important part in the writings of the Ari, talking about metaphysical structure of the universe and transformative moments, important moments in the history of the universe. And כי בכל זמן של הגלות, anytime there is an exile, and an exile is not a physical state, it's a metaphysical state that has a physical manifestation. Exile means disconnection. Disconnection, which means a metaphysical disconnection, which means a time of darkness, where there's no unity, there's separation, disunity between heaven and earth, and people cannot feel the revelation of godliness on its full. That's galut. The result will be that the Jewish people will be exiling to foreign countries and experience being foreign, and which means like in exile, you don't belong. That means this is a metaphysical state, because a lot of people that grow up in their own country, in their own language, and they still feel that they don't belong mentally, which means they still feel foreign, not connected. They speak the language, they know the culture, they don't feel alive, they don't feel excited, they don't feel hopeful. That's exile. Exile is a state of disconnection. So during the time of the exile, when, according to the teachings of Rabbi Zakloria, when you see the nation of Israel in exile, you know that metaphysically the whole universe is in a state of disconnection. And that's why you see a lot of injustice and negativity, and you can see like real greatness. During that time, Ze'an Pin and Malchut, which means the male and the female forces of the upper world, they are standing back to back. Like it is said, there's a legend when Adam was created, and it says in Genesis 1, in the image of God they were created, male and female, he created them. So why do we need to hear about the creation of Eve in chapter 2? And the answer is, they were created male and female back like Siamese twins back to back. And therefore, to disconnect that and to get them into being face to face, God had to put sleep over, to put Adam to sleep. And then God separated the right from the left. He separated the left side, the female side. Eve, by the way, tsela in Hebrew means side. Sometimes it means a rib. Most translations say a rib, that Eve was created from the rib. No, in Hebrew, it means the side. The female side was separated from the male side, and that's how Eve came into being. Now they were separated, they could turn face to face and now unite to create the power of redemption. Redemption is when there is a face-to-face connection between the spiritual male and female, okay, and the upper world and the lower world. Now, during the exile, we can create that face-to-face connection, spiritual face-to-face connection, during the prayers and during Shabbat and holidays. However, after a long time of exile, when you need to put back the cosmic male and female face, you need again to create what is called dormita. Dormita is Aramaic, in Hebrew tardema, in Latin is dormant, like you have in English or in French. What is sleep? When a person is dormant, there is separation between the body and the soul. Okay, so they can get back to face when there's a wake up in the morning. Now, and since the matter of Mordechai and Esther was towards the end of the 70 years of the exile, the Babylonian exile, therefore, it was the whole world was starting to realign. So again, there will be redemption face to face. And in order for that, you need to have dormita. So there will be a redemption. Continues the Arizal. And therefore, that issue of the dormita came into being towards the end of the 70 years after the exile. And when there is dormita, it's really, it's like when a person is asleep, it's very healthy to sleep. Because when the body and the soul are separated, then both the body and the soul, they recuperate. They go through cleansing. They go through strengthening. Because during the whole day, they fight with each other, and that's very tiring. So we know when somebody could be like the strongest person in the world. However, when he is asleep, he is not protected at all. He is totally, totally unshielded. You can come to him with a gun, with a knife. He is not aware. He is asleep. Okay, he's defenseless. And that's what happened. When that Dormita time came, that was the secret behind the great trouble that the people of Israel had at that time. About it, it says, and it was like fear and darkness when you read the story of the covenant between God and Abraham. That first he felt fear and darkness. That was a prophecy about the different exiles his children are going to go through. And the sages said that the darkness, that's the exile of Madai, Persia. שהחשיך עיניהם של ישראל. The eyes of the nation of Israel got darkened. And so how do we explain it? Because there was Dormita, And the dormita is that there is a sleep. And when there is that sleep, when you're asleep, you're basically defenseless. And we know that Haman, who was, as we said, the head of the anti-Jewish coalition in the Persian government, he was a great, says the Arizal, he was a great astrologer and a warlock. And therefore he knew that there is a dormita. He knew that the Jews are defenseless. He knew that they won't fight back. He knew that they are not protected. And therefore he had in mind, this is the time to destroy and exterminate and leave nothing. So when the redemption is coming back, there was nobody to redeem. So that was the idea. There was dormita. And how do we see that? The Midrash is telling us that when Haman is speaking with Achashverosh, in the Megillah it says that Achashverosh, the king of Persia, he said to Haman, his first reaction was, "Are you crazy? Whoever messed up with the Jews, ended in the garbage can of history. Where is Pharaoh? Where are the Assyrians? Where are the Babylonians? They're all in the garbage can of history. I'm not going to start with them. I'm going to end like all the other enemies." And Haman is saying, "You're right. However, their God, the God of the Jews, is asleep." When he says, "Yeshno am mefuzar mefuraz," when it says that Haman says to Hashverosh, there is a nation that is spread and separated among the nations. Okay, at that time the Jews were exiled into Persia and Babylon, into Yemen, into Egypt, into North Africa. But the word Yeshno, which translates into there is also Yashen Vav. The Vav is asleep. And the Vav symbolizes the power of the upper spiritual connection to God. That's what the letter Vav symbolizes. If you know the Tetragrammaton, Yud and Hey, Vav and Hey, the Hey, the lower Hey, the last Hey, is the vessel, reality. The Vav is the connection to divine. So when it says Yeshno, Yashen Vav, there's no connection to divine. They're asleep. It's like when you sleep, the body is there, but there are no powers of awakening. And because the Dormita was in favor of the nation of Israel, in order to separate the male and the female so they come back face to face, and redemption, which means the idea that you can experience God's presence in your life, and the building of the temple was part of that awakening. Therefore now, Haman explained to Hashverosh, they are now in Dormita. While this is happening, let us destroy, kill all of them. So when the 70 years of exile are over, there will be no one left for being redeemed. And then the temple won't be built. Okay, and now we mention this because we know in different midrashim all about those letters and about this coalition of anti-Jews and so on and so forth, until the influence in the court was strong enough to withdraw the permit to build the temple, the second temple. Okay, however, even though there is a time of Dormita, Dormita is a stage in which it looks like that everybody's awake. You go to work, you come back, you eat, you get married, you have children, you celebrate, and it doesn't look to the physical eye that there is sleep. However, there is sleep, and the sleep is that there's no defense. However, when there is sleep, still, when a person is asleep, there's still a spark of life, because otherwise, how can the person is still breathing? And that spark of light is a special spark of light that even though there's a sleep and darkness, that spark of life is there so you can hold on to it and wake up anytime. And that illumination, that spark of life, that hope is called Mordechai, as we're going to explain. So, Mordechai, as we said, it is in Parashat Kitisa that we read this week that Mordechai is pure mir. Mo is mir in Hebrew. Dechai in Aramaic means pure mir, which means this is a light of pure mir that is coming from above like an essence of holiness that you can tap into it even when the days are the darkest. That's why, because Haman was very strong into witchcraft, every time he saw Mordechai, he was really, really upset. So what happened? When Haman looked in his charts to see when are the Jews going to be the most vulnerable, and he realized it's going to be according to the astrology, that's going to be on the 13th day of Adar. Okay, when did Haman do that? On the 13th day of Nisan, 11 months earlier. He got the king to sign the decree, and he published the decree to all 127 states of the Persian Empire, all 127 states, all the way from India to Africa. Wasn't he afraid the Jews are going to get organized to fight back? No, he was not afraid at all. He said the Jews are under Dormita. They will not be able to get up and stand. They will go like sheep to the slaughter. Sounds illogical. Less than 100 years ago, there was a guy in Germany. He published books about his vision, and he established the Nazi movement in Germany, and he came to power that his main winning token was, we will kill all the Jews, and that's how we save Europe and the whole world. Okay? And what did the Jews of Europe do? Nothing. Very little managed to escape. All the rest went like sheep to the slaughter. That is Dormita. That is Dormita. So, however, when Haman saw, after publishing the decree on the 13th of Nisan, 2 days before the Seder, Passover Seder, when he published that, he realized that as long as Mordechai is there, his plan is not secured. So he was upset, and he spoke with Zeresh, his wife, and his 365 members of his board, and they came to the idea to build gallows, a wooden gallows, the height of 50 cubits, which is 25 meters of today. What do you need to build something so tall? And the answer, it was a bewitched wood in order to get Mordechai to the 50th gate of impurity. When you get to that gate, there's no way out. So now, if Mordechai is going to be hanged and bewitched, that will guarantee. However, before that was done, Mordechai goes to the gate of the palace, and he sits there with sackcloth, and he's mourning like the rest of the Jews. And they do nothing. And when Esther hears that, she's asking Mordechai what to do, and he says, now you should know it's not by coincidence that you became the queen. You should go to the king. And the queen is saying, it's already 30 days I was not called to the king. And according to the law of the kingdom, if you go to the king and you're not invited, you could be executed. So what I'm telling you is gather all the Jews, unite them, lech knos et kol haYehudim, make them fast for 3 days, 72 hours, and after 72 hours, I will fast also, and after 72 hours, I will go to the king. If he hands me the scepter, I'm safe. If not, I'll be executed. So that's what happened. Now, so what happened was when for 72 hours, all the Jews of the empire fasted. They didn't eat, they didn't drink. However, they gave charity, but it doesn't say they gave charity to the poor. They gave gifts to the poor. You know, who do you give gifts to? Somebody you love, somebody you care. Many times you're more excited that that person got your gift than he's excited. So it's like giving a gift to your equal. It's like giving the gift to the poor with excitement. And they gave presents to each other, and they gave food to each other, and they united with each other. And that basic idea of devotion, of giving oneself, sharing oneself, eliminating the ego and the negativity, and just having that amazing teshuvah, returning to God for 72 hours. And how do we know it's connected to the 72 names of God? Because after Esther is saying to Mordechai to do that, the first word is Vaya'avor. And the sages are teaching us, if you look at the word Vaya'avor, you have Ein Bet, 72, and you have Resh Yud Vav, 216. 216 is the number of letters of the 72 names. 72 names of 3 letters each. So they use the 72 names, and they did everything possible by prayers and repentance and unity with so much devotion that created an amazing miracle. How do we know? We'll see later. So that light that appeared in Purim, that changed everything, that created the change from Dormita to awakening and redemption because the temple was built as a result of the miracle of Purim. God wanted that light to stay available every generation in the days of Purim. And therefore, in the future to come, when the Messianic era will commence, all the books of the Bible will be canceled. Why? Why? And the answer is the books of the Torah were given to us in order to purify us. However, when the Messianic era is there, we will be pure. That's a condition. So I don't need the books except from the book of Esther, because the light of the book of Esther is above that. And we created that book. We created that miracle. The holidays will cease to exist because we don't need the holidays anymore to cleanse us. However, Purim will stay forever because we created it. And it's basically a tribute to our great victory over darkness. Therefore, Purim is much in a higher place than all the other days and even Shabbat and holidays. Okay, so what do we go? Let's go back to the story. So what happens that after 72 hours are over, and remember, if that started before Pesach, because the decree was on the 13th of Nisan, Passover night is on the 15th of Nisan. So they fasted for 3 days. It means there was no Seder, Passover Seder celebration, because that's all about food. And when Mordechai is saying that to Esther, she says, Alai, that's on me. My responsibility, I take the responsibility. And basically, like she said, the angels will come to hear and to participate in the Seder celebration. And there won't be. The houses of the Jews will be dark, no food on the table, no 4 cups, no matzah, no maror. They're fasting. And they will like be in shock. Where is our Seder? And the Jews will say, if you go to God and you pray for us, next year there will be a Seder. But if you don't, we'll all be dead and you'll never have a Seder. So what happened? That night, the Torah, the book of Esther says, "Balayla hu nadeda shnat hamelech," and that verse is being read very loud. It says in the halacha to wake up whoever is asleep. Who can wake up when everybody's noisy during every time the word Haman is mentioned? But we're talking about that night. The, the king could not sleep. The king of the world. What does it mean? The Dormita was awakened. How was the Dormita awakened? The devotion of the Jewish people, fasting, sharing whatever food they had with others, sharing whatever money they had with the poor. That devotion transformed the Dormita, awakened the union between the male and the female, the creator and the creation. And that's why the physical king, the king of Persia, could not sleep that night. Cause and effect. It reminds us another thing. On October 7th, 2023, the mighty army of Israel was asleep. Physically, the soldiers all over the fortresses along the Gaza border, they were asleep. The Prime Minister of Israel was asleep. Nobody thought about waking him up. Dormita. And for hours and hours, the Gaza people raided the villages and towns around behind the Gaza border. They created horrible, exactly like the decree of Haman, להשמיד, להרוג ולאבד את כל היהודים, to destroy, to exterminate, to kill all the Jews, and to basically rob whatever they had. There was a Dormita. The prophecy of the Zohar was that could have taken a whole year and Persia will take over. Iran would have taken over the whole land of Israel. What changed that? The Israeli army was asleep, the Air Force, everything, most of the first day, most of the day of the October 7th, 2023. But people, private people who heard about it from all over the country, took a weapon, sometimes they didn't have a weapon, and simply ran to the Gaza border. They found weapons, they took their own weapons. They had just basically guns, short like guns, maybe something more, and they fought with so much devotion and sacrifice. And that saved the day. Those people simply against the orders of the Israeli army. They fought and they created like a militia. They joined together. Some of them fought without any organization. They just fought. And we learned that the giving of yourself in such a magnitude and the volunteering of the rest of the Israelis and the Jews around the world and non-Jews around the world that volunteered to come and help and support and send money and so on. That devotion, like in Purim, restored, awakened the dormant luck. And then the everything was changed. And as the Zohar is saying, after that, a new process will start. Well, the Persian Empire that will take countries, and it took. They controlled Yemen, they controlled Iraq, they controlled Syria, they controlled Lebanon. Okay? And everybody else was afraid of them. And they started to fall on that day. Till we see yesterday, till their leader, the vicious Haman of our generation, was finally killed, and all his advisors in one shot on Shabbat Zachor, the Shabbat that we read about that in the Torah. So that night, the king could not sleep. Why couldn't sleep? The unity, the devotion, the giving to each other. They sacrifice. When people sacrifice their life for somebody else, when all of these people, they gave their lives to save the nation, the king could not sleep anymore. And then in the physical world, in the Megillah, the king of Persia could not sleep. And he woke up and he couldn't fall asleep again. So he asked to read the book of memoirs of the throne. And he opened on a very special page in which years earlier, Mordechai found out that there were Baluchi guards to the king, and they were conspiring to kill the king and take over the throne. Mordechai told Esther, and Esther told the king, and that's how the king was saved. Suddenly, the king of Persia, Ahasuerus, is worried about one thing. How come we did not thank Mordechai? How should we thank? He's obsessed about thanking Mordechai. So he's asking, it's like early in the morning, who is in the court? And Haman was in the court with the verdict of execution of Mordechai. He needed to have this king sign on it. So the king is calling Haman in. Haman is coming in with a verdict. And the king is asking Haman, what should be done with the person that the king wants everybody to know that the king is thankful to him? So Haman thinks in his heart, who the king wants to thank more than me? I am the most beloved person. I'm the most powerful person. So he said, oh, he started to think, if the king says, how should we appreciate the person? We should take the horse of the king and dress the person with all the clothes of the king and with his crown and his scepter. And somebody very important should take him around the capital, saying, so should be done with the person that the king appreciates. And the king says, I knew you are smart. Go and do to Mordechai exactly what you said. For the whole day, Haman realized the king won't sign the verdict. And for the whole day, Haman is going around all over the city. And he's totally ashamed, humiliated. When he's coming home, he's telling that to his family, and they say, if Mordechai is Jewish, you started to fall, it won't stop. Why? The Dormita is over. From now on, it's your downfall. And then he goes to the party with Esther. She invites him, and she tells the king that, if the king really loves me and loves my people, we were doomed to death. And the king, like, who said that? Says Haman. He wants to kill all of us. So the king got really upset because the king realized the Dormita is over. And he goes to the garden, he comes back, and Mordechai and Haman is begging for his life in front of Esther. He's on the bed. There were, if you see in ancient times, there were parting, each one lying on a bed and eating with a lot of like pillows and stuff like this. And he's on the bed and he comes in and he sees Haman in the queen's bed. Oh, not enough. You want all of that power. You want also the queen. Kill him. And he was hung on the tree that he prepared for Mordechai. Okay, that's a story. So something very amazing. If you've seen before, that's how a paragraph in the Megillah looks like. It's a paragraph like in the Torah. But when it is being explained how the 10 sons of Haman were hung, it's written this way. You see, it's a different design. It had all of these, has the whole page has to be read in one breath. And there's something very unusual. If you look, the words, the letters are much bigger than the rest of the Megillah, right? However, there are three places the words, there are small, tiny letters. One is on the second line. On the right, you see the small letter Tav. Then you have in the middle Parmashta, the small letter Shin, and then at the bottom, the third letter from the right, you see a small letter Zain, Vaizata. What are these letters? For many, many thousands of years, nobody knew. But then came the year 1946. There were the Nuremberg trials. 12 heads of the Nazi regime were in court, international court. They were sentenced to death. One was not there. One was committed suicide in jail. On that day, 10 men were hanged. The year was in the Hebrew calendar, Taf Shin Zayin, exactly the letters shown over here. The 10th of them all, as he comes to be hanged, he shouts, it was published in newspapers all over the world, we have another Purim spiel. It used to be in many, many years that every Jewish community had a Purim show, like, playing the story of Purim. So somebody dressed up like Haman, somebody dressed up like Vaizata, his son, somebody like Esther, somebody Mordechai. Till today, you see, during the Purim celebrations, people disguise into Achashverosh and Haman and Mordechai and Esther and Vashti and so on, all the people of the Megillah. And he screams, this is another Purim spiel. It's another Purim show. And he was executed in the year of Taf Shin Zayin. Then some people started to realize these three letters are a date. The date that thing happens all over again. So how do we connect to the power of Purim? The light that was revealed was so powerful, and we want to pull it in, draw it into ourselves so we can overcome our own negativity, our own Haman, our own Amalek, our own doubts and hatred and disconnection and exile and hopelessness. And especially the light of Mordechai, that if you hear stories, you hear on one hand, during the Holocaust and also during October 7th, 2023, you hear terrible stories of cruelty, murder, torture, like human mind cannot accept it. However, you hear also unbelievable stories of miracles, of faith, and people being saved by the bell in the most miraculous way through faith beyond imagination. This is the reality of the light of Mordechai. This is the reality of the light of the Megillah. That even though things will go dark as darker can be, you can still connect to that light of Mordechai, the pure light that comes from the highest place in the tree of life down to our world. And that's why it's called Megillah. Megillah means in Hebrew a parchment, but it means also revelation. to reveal Esther the secret. And that's why the Megillah must be revealed. That's why the Torah, when you read the Torah, it's rolled on both sides. The Megillah has to be opened all way long. Megillah, in the short form, like it's in the Torah, without the vowels, it's written as Mem Gimel Lamed Hey, Mem Gimel Lamed Hey. Then its numerical value 78, which is the secret of the 13 attributes. This is the 3 times Youdkevitch, the number 78, Mazala, changing faith from the source. And that's why the Megillah is also when you write the Megillah, you write it by the same laws as writing a Torah. So every year, during the time of the holiday, every holiday, that light appears again. And during Purim, the whole energy of the Dormita and the darkness appears again, but it's not as powerful as it used to be because it was won by already during Purim, was broken. And that's why every year during the holiday of Purim, on one hand, there's a revelation of the power of the Amalek, and there's a revelation of the power to basically win over that dark force that Amalek is manifesting. And as we said, who is the Amalek? When you see pathological hatred to God, to divinity, to spirituality, to spiritual wisdom, to the Bible, to the message of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to the Jewish people as representing that message. How do we know it's a pathological disease? Because it's self-destructive. Look at Germany. Look at Haman. Look at the rulers of Iran of today. What kind of terrible destruction they bring upon themselves. Totally illogical. You would think they're smart people. Going straight into destruction. And that's why we have to destroy on these days the klipa, the dark force of Haman, which represents the dark force of the dark side. And how do we do it? We draw in the light of Purim with the reading of the Megillah, with the celebration of happiness and joy, which is the main thing of Purim. And that's why it says, the halacha says, whoever reads the Megillah backwards, it doesn't count. Who would read the Megillah backwards? It's a long book. And the answer is no. If you read the Megillah as, oh, that's a story that we traditionally read because something to memorize something that happened in the past, that's not going to give you anything. When you read the Megillah as a metaphysical revelation of metaphysical light, that the reading of the Megillah is awakening the same divine light that had been revealed in ancient times and created a miracle, now you experience the same power all over again in order to destroy that klipa, that dark force of negativity. So what do we do? In addition to that, you have to give charity to the poor. That's also the half a shekel. And having the mishloach manot, giving presents, food to your friends, and eating the Purim meal. And you think that when you eat the Purim meal, you draw in all of that light for the whole year. So what about getting drunk? Once a year, you have to get drunk. What does it mean? You have to be really out of your mind and sick. Basically, the idea is that the light is coming from such a high place that human logic just disturbs it. So when you drink the wine and you stop making logic out of things, you kind of erase your logic. You allow that light and a new consciousness to come in, so that holiness is coming in, so we can see that, basically to see that even Haman was good. What does it mean? Without Haman, we won't have the miracle of Purim and the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash, of the temple. Same thing, that everything stirs the good, great picture of God. So basically, that's the story of Purim, and that's how it's connected to exactly our days. When we see that exactly on these days, on Shabbat, Zachor, the Haman of today is being finally removed from the face of the earth. And we see the downfall of the regime of Amalek that led so much with its fortune, with its power, so much hatred, so much cruelty to its own people, for other nations, and for Jews around the world. Thank you so much, and have a great, successful Purim for all of us, so we can really bring the redemption and the building of the third temple.